It is a good day today. My name is Martin Chiinji, a PhD student from Nkumba University, Uganda. Today, I want us to learn together the nature of existence as the foundationalism of existential knowledge and empirical knowledge. Please don't get confused. Give me time, we study together. You'll understand. All of us in this world, we are in quest of establishing who am I, why me, why that. Many things we wonder, and because of that wonder, we quest to know. As we study together the nature of existence, we want to appreciate that the knowledge that we know possibly may not be the only knowledge possible within our possibility of existence. As part of the introduction, I want to believe that all of us are born into a world that is already existing. So, because something is already in existence, this requires an existential explanation so that we may understand whether we are by coincidence or we are part of a wider framework of existence. The quest for exploring why anything at all may exist is a quest for the fundamental nature of existence of my own identity. Therefore, the quest for knowledge to establish why something exists rather than nothing, it is the pathway of realizing the philosophy of education. Therefore, this needs exploring and establishing the nature of existence of such possibility of existence. Whatever you look at and you say, what is this? You are actually asking a fundamental question. Why is it? When is it? You are asking a fundamental question. That's why Plato says philosophy begins with wonder. I want to say that the quest for knowing whatever we know has continued based on the five senses. I see, I hear, I taste, my skin tells me, and also my nose can smell and tell me what it is. As part of the introduction, we want to establish whether the possibility of existence is limited to only what is physical, which is seen by these five senses. And if that is true, therefore, the only truth that can exist in this world is also physical. And so, whatever which is seen and verifiable and justifiable by physical senses then remains to be the only possibility of existence. But basing on the physical senses, the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, and the skin, there is possibility of existence that is not verifiable and justifiable by physical senses. Now that we know that many things cannot be seen, heard, eaten, or tasted by skin, we must be able to establish how do we know such knowledge which is not verifiable by the physical senses. At this moment, we can agree that surely the physical senses is out of capability to provide such knowledge. Else, we may go into the problem of sophism, And I have said, coming up with clever arguments, but with the wrong intent for self-destruction. One of the things that we can conclude in the introduction is that the physical senses, which we call as the somatosense, is not able to tell us that which is not decoded by the same senses. Therefore, we are going to dig down into a study to establish whether the possibility of existence, which is verifiable and justifiable by physical senses, is the only reality. Let me repeat this. We are going down into a study to establish whether that which our physical senses can see is the only possibility of reality. And if that is true, then the entire existential knowledge is limited to empirical knowledge. As part of the problem of study, we want to explore the nature of existence so that we can establish if the possibility of reality is limited to what is physical, or what we call as the physical reality. Therefore, if that is true, the physical truth and empirical knowledge, yes, will be the only possibility of existence. As part of the objective of study, we are going to explore the fundamental nature, why everything exists, and why are we part of that existence. So, we will be able to establish if the existential truth, which is beyond what the eyes can see, is limited to what only makes sense to physical sense. And if that is true, therefore, existential knowledge of every possibility of existence will be limited to empirical knowledge. We are going to study basing on 3 questions. Number 1, is the possibility of existence limited to physical reality, such that the empirical knowledge of arts and science is the only knowledge about the possibility of existence? Number 2, is empirical knowledge of arts and science, now that it is of a possibility which is visible, verifiable, and justifiable by physical senses, how do we gain knowledge of a reality which is not verifiable by physical senses, since it is already part of possibility of existence? Question number 3, is the possibility of existential problems, is it limited to what we see? The problems that we are solving, are they limited to what makes sense or what can be seen by the physical sense? If not so, then what is the significance of this empirical knowledge? As we move ahead in our study, I have taken a methodology which is IMRAD, and we are going to follow the same processes so that we are able to appreciate the study of today. But owing to the scantiness of literature and the limitations of our physical evidence, the study is purely qualitative, and it's based on a desk review. This study is pure research. What I mean by pure research, I'm saying the study goes deep in the fundamentals of our existence. but it has a component of applied research. And it's based on the critical review of the biblical evidence because many of us believe in the Bible. It is also an exploration of the Kemetic literature. Whenever we talk of Kemet, Kemet is a name of ancient Egypt, but Kemet also means black, the black people, the ancient black people. We will also look at the systems analysis of the philosophy of Ubuntu and the theory of existentialism. While exploring the fundamental nature of existence, finally, I will establish an existential system model that can be used for further quest for knowledge. As part of the literature review, to establish why do I exist, I have looked at a number of resources, including the philosophy of education, the ancient Egypt-based Kemetic education system, the philosophy of causality, the anthology or a collection of religious beliefs, the concept and the image of God, Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 4 to 7, James chapter 4 verse 1 to 3, the philosophy of Ubuntu, and the theory of existentialism. These will help us to establish and examine what is the nature of existence. And number two, if we understand the nature of existence, so what is my existence within the bigger nature of existence? As part of the studies, now we go to the results. Looking at the results, a biography, I have realized that the name of now which we call Africa has changed over time. It has been called as Eden, Al-Keblan, Ethiopia, Kush, and so forth. But the naming indicates the timing and the era of civilization of time. Therefore, the quest for the nature of existence is an existential wonder about my existence, whether I am a random occurrence or a systemic possibility. I realized, looking into archaeological excavations, I find in the Rift Valley of Kenya, Leakey notes that the oldest fossil is 3 million years ago. But that is what has been found. This does not mean that that is by far the most ancient possibility of existence. It is just the remains of people who were found in the East Valley who have been made known so far to us to know where our background can begin. Comparing with such a finding, it also coincides with the New International Version, Genesis 2:8-17, which says, "And the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed." Now, here we see two things. And the Lord God is in the east of Eden. Eden is one of the ancient names of Africa, and there he put man whom he had formed. Klein, Lopez, and others, they say that all fossils of most ancient findings almost 6 to 2 million years ago is entirely from Africa. The quest for knowledge by the respective dwellers from Eden, which was also called Al-Keblan. This quest for these hominids for wonder led them to Eden hominid emigrations. And these emigrations was along the source of River Nile. It led to the establishment of settlements from Mizraim, which is the ancient name of Egypt, which is now by the mouth of the Mediterranean Ocean. McTaggart notes that these movements of the ancient dwellers from interior east of Africa are probably were water people, because both Genesis and the findings of Leakey notes it is in the east of Eden that man first gains face on the face of earth. Diop also notes that the quest for knowledge or education, which is now considered as the out of Eden theory of immigrations, it gave rise to a number of ancient Eden civilizations. And it is through these ancient Eden civilizations over the years which have passed now back to sand gave rise to the ancient Egyptian civilization. Grimaud notes that the ancient Egyptian civilization dates more than 700 years, and it thrived independently until 1100 BC. This does not mean that there are no other people that started expanding or the immigration started. It is just a concern of this was a center, one of the milestones of civilizations that led to the dispersal of people out of Africa or Eden or Al-Keblan. I will keep using these three names subsequently. In the order, Eden means the most ancient, Al-Keblan is after a period closer to us, and then Africa is the now, a period where we are existing in the present. Therefore, the possibility of existence and quest for wonder did not originate by the Greeks. Let me repeat this. The quest for wonder of the nature of our existence did not commence with the Greeks. Why is it so? For two reasons. One, the Greeks conquered the ancient Egypt, which had lived for more than 700 years, but they conquered ancient Egypt in c. 332 before Christ. These are very many years. You cannot tell me in those years there was no education, there was no knowledge being looked at. But this knowledge of the civilizations from ancient Africa was documented by the technology of the time, which was the stone carvings, the metal carvings, the pictograms that we see appearing in the ancient Egypt writing, the footprints that were found in many excavation centers, including what Leakey family found around the Rift Valley regions, the bones, and other tools. As a matter of fact, we can now say that the African people or the Eden ancient people were already civilized They had what we call as a black education system. Now, whenever you hear a word of Kemetic education system, the word Kemet means black. Black people. Some people think it is black soils, but predominantly it is the color of the ancient people that first lived on the face of this world. Therefore, the Kemetic people had a social judicial system based on the laws of Mat. They had learned how to domesticate animals, farming, fishing, doing painting. They knew calligraphy based on pictography. These people also, they considered the nature of existence as all is one, which we refer to as Ubuntu. The term Ubuntu is so ancient, it did not begin just a few days. Now, it has been with us for more than many years in history. These people could communicate, they had a language, they could sing, they knew astronomy, they knew medicine, calculus, they had defense systems, and they had other abstruse. Now, whenever you see the word abstruse, means knowledge that was not basically of physical possibility. Now, they preserved all the education and the quest for knowledge as focused at growing into the image of God. Looking at such a background, it is such that made ancient philosophers to move down from Greeks to Egypt, crossing the Mediterranean to come and study. Among the notable ones, I only managed to bring about Thales, Anaximander, Anaximenes, Pythagoras, Xenophanes, Heraclitus, Empedocles, and many others. These guys went to Egypt to study in the temples of Waset, Karnak, Epet, and among other study centers that were the epitome of education of the time. Therefore, basing on formal logic, the quest for knowledge led to an understanding that the possibility of existence possibly is not only a physical possibility. That's why in the discourse of Plato, he noted that the Egyptian knowledge and curriculum was esoteric, abstruse, and other mundane subjects. It was based on growing into harmony, balance, and truth with nature's providence. Egypt was the epitome of education, of black education system during the ancient times. Let me say this. Whenever I talk about the black education system, this is not an aspect of racism. This is not an aspect of color segregation. I'm just simply referring to of the time when the blacks had a black-based education system beyond what is visible and verifiable by the physical senses. Even Hilliard, Rebecca, Diop, and Ross, they also agree that such an education system was really esoteric. It was mesmeric. It was abstruse. It means it had other aspects which were not basically verifiable by physical senses. Therefore, when the ancient Greeks conquered the Egyptians, they asserted their presence. They changed the state and the national language. They abolished the black or the Kemetic education system, especially areas which were not making sense to physical senses. They changed the judicial systems from the laws of Maat into the Decalogue or the Ten Commandments. The ancient laws of Maat were 42 of the time, but whatever was not physically making sense was removed, and the Decalogue is only the 10 Commandments which make sense to now physical senses alone. The Egyptians had developed a theosophical and theodicy literature. Now, whenever I talk of theodicy, I'm talking of the fundamental nature of sin or deviation from the nature of existence. All this literature was translated into Greek language. The gods, the forms worshipped, the social life, everything was mixed. Intermarriages, the change of government symbols, the folk tales, the art, the pottery. Because of the conquering by the Greeks, they changed the knowledge into which they were educated, combined with what they never studied as abstruse, and considered it as Greek literature. So they destroyed, they made sure nothing Egyptian remains. The writing became Greek. Everything became Greek. Whatever was not verifiable by the physical senses was abolished. It was pillaged. It was burnt down. But what is called as the Kemetic curriculum and the syllabus was never a mystery to these ancient people who were conquered and the prior civilizations. The prior civilizations focused at growing into oneness. We can call it Ubuntu-ness with the image of God. Therefore, this Kemetic education curriculum was focused at controlling the possibility of physical reality within the mind. Therefore, preserving all species, not only man, in harmonious coexistence with nature. Looking at strengthening family, moral, and social values as all is one, and thus growing into quest for the image of God. The continuous consciousness of such a framework is the foundation of the interconnectedness and interdependence of all possibility of existence, and is the culmination into the ancient quest for existential knowledge. The laws of Maat were based on free will desire. I will not do this. I will not do this. I will not do this. Rather than now the Decalogue, which is based on do not kill, do not murder, do not steal. Therefore, right now, Christianity is based on the 10 Commandments, which is a subset of the ancient laws of Maat, which were beyond what is verifiable by physical senses. I want to say that when the Greeks conquered the ancient Egyptians and changed everything, the ancient Egyptians had several fights back and forth. Before, in 1612, they had been conquered by Mesopotamia or Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar, starting with King Nebuchadnezzar's father. So King Nebuchadnezzar inherited the throne of his father. After King Nebuchadnezzar, there came Medes and Persia, they also conquered ancient Egypt. After that, also came the Greeks. And after the Greeks, in 332, conquering ancient Egypt and changing the education curriculum. By the time it came to 146 BC, the Romans also conquered the ancient Egyptians, who were now mixed Egyptians and Greeks, but speaking both languages. The transition moved more of speaking Egyptian languages into Greek. It is for this reason that all reference to philosophy research dates back to only Greeks, but the Greek knowledge was learned from ancient Egyptians. From 146, Constantine led to the unification of the pagan Rome and Christianity. Therefore, the identity for spirituality and free will, it was limited to religious beliefs and dogmas. Let me say this, sorry. The identity, the ability for spirituality and the free will was limited to religious beliefs. Therefore, after it being limited to religious beliefs, the religious beliefs became the social rituals. How to worship a God who is visible by physical senses became the order of the day. The worship of statues multiplied. The worship of symbolisms increased. The worship of a reality which makes sense to physical sense was the order of the norm. The ancient concept of God with us was changed to God in heaven. I want you to appreciate this. The ancient Egyptians and civilizations before believed that God is with us, is not in heaven. But from the Greeks and the Romans until now, we believe God is in heaven. So the Christians are hopeful to go to heaven, hoping that heaven possibly is a location somewhere. This has taken on the understanding of our background until now that we think one day we will be able to go to heaven, not knowing that possibly we are already in heaven and we are messing up our plot of heaven where we are supposed to be. Man is messing up the side of heaven which is meant for his existence. Therefore, since 1612 BC, it is now almost 2814, because by the time today it is 2022 November. The quest for knowledge has thus continued limited to what makes sense to physical senses. And it is for this reason, please get me well, because the ancient Kemetic education system, which had more forms of inquiry, was overthrown by the Greeks in quest for physical truth. The considered reality is called physical reality. The knowledge is called empirical. Our identity, that which we consider as normal, the truth, whatever we call as good, the God, the essence of our existence and our experiences has been limited and limited to that which makes sense because it is verifiable and justifiable by mere physical senses alone. Therefore, the empirical knowledge is the basis of reasoning as if the possibility of existence is limited to physical reality. As well, look at the subjects that we are studying. They are limited to physics, chemistry, biology, history, geography, basically subjects which make sense to what we can see, touch, feel, taste, and smell. The Greek-led education curriculum thus has only considered reality as only limited to physical possibility. Even in my country in Uganda, the East of Eden, the prevailing philosophical referencing is significantly considered basing and referencing to Greek gods, but not their Kemetic teachers. The global philosophical quest for knowledge has continued, focusing on what Plato said, what Socrates said, what the Greek scholars said, but these guys were trained in Africa. These guys deleted, these guys demoted, these guys reduced our knowledge of our identity to what is physical. They reduced our ability to study the nature of existence to what makes sense to only 5 senses. Let me summarize this. What you see on the left has been summarized by the book of Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2 talks of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. The dream that Nebuchadnezzar had is exclusive of all Eden, Al-Keblan, and now Africa-based prior civilizations. But at the bottom of this dream, I say, the Brexit is one of the latest indicators that despite Nebuchadnezzar ruling Babylon, despite Persia, despite the Greece and the Greeks, despite Rome now leading all major education institutions, hospitals, places of reverence, these were also divided into the generation of the divided kingdom. The divided kingdom is European Union. It is of an existential fact that the European Union, no matter the quest to unite, has failed to unite until when UK exited. Let me say this. It has also become obvious that since UK exited the European Union via the leadership of Theresa May, until today, November 2022, it has changed many prime ministers. The leadership of UK has changed hands much more frequently than ever before. Could this be the end of time? No, the end is still not yet. But the end is the beginning of yet another nature of existence. What is ending? What is ending right now is the quest for knowledge basing on what makes sense to physical sense. The generations of Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, and the European Union have led us through what makes sense to physical sense. We now need to dig back and go back and establish the nature of existence as is based on the ancient black-based education system. I will tell you that verily, 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 there is a possibility of existence that is not verifiable and justifiable by physical senses. Therefore, I can say empirical knowledge of arts and science, which makes sense because it is verifiable and justifiable by physical senses, is never the only possibility of existential knowledge. When we talk of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, at the base here, at the foot, at the divided kingdom, what is coming to an end is the end of ignorance of the nature of existence. Now, let us transition beyond what makes sense to science, beyond what makes sense to scientism, beyond what makes sense to laboratory work, and go into the depth of the crust of the matter. Looking back, we can only start from where we know and go deep into what we don't know. The concept of causality or causing is a relationship between possible cause and effect. Our godfathers, the Greeks, that we refer to as the founders of philosophy, they led us astray into a situation where they considered the fundamental basis of causing any possibility of existence as limited to the four fundamental elements of fire, air, water, and earth. It is on this notion that even the entertainers have caused movies like the firebender, airbenders, waterbenders, earthbenders. We know this famous cartoon. They considered the fundamental cause of everything as a physical possibility. When the Romans conquered the Greeks, they continued with the same education system, and they both explored the concept of causality based on what is sensible because it is verifiable and justifiable by physical sense. But they never explored the nature of existence. So, basing on this, we have gone through closer now to 3,000 years of history only in quest for physical truth rather than existential truth. It is the possibility of reality, thus, has remained limited to the nature of being or the physical reality. Looking at such a background, let us go to the text of authority. Let us turn together to Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 4 to 7. Here we find the writing of King Solomon, which is almost 935 BC by the time it was written. Solomon looked at his life, at the epitome or at the end of his life. He compared with his life and the stars and the big things around him. And he said in chapter 4, generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. Verse 5, The sun rises, the sun sets, and hurries back where it rises. Verse 6. The wind also blows to the south and returns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. Please mark, returning on its course. Verse 7. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the stream comes from, yet there it returns. What does this verse mean? This is what it means: that none of the possibility of existence is by random occurrence. Nothing happens by coincidence. Yet nothing is predetermined nor predestined. Therefore, I myself, Martin Chiyinji, a Ugandan, a Muganda, I am never by coincidence. And so is the experience of my existence that I'm going through is also never by coincidence. This simply means that the nature or the framework of existence into which my existence is an eternal ecosystem, which is an existential system. Let me repeat this. The nature or the framework of existence, including trees, animals, birds, and whatever we can see or not see by physical senses. My existence is part of an eternal ecosystem, which is the existential system. King Solomon concluded and said, life is meaningless without God. When you read Ecclesiastes, you'll find the meaninglessness of our existence. Now, let's compare the nature of existence of King Solomon's cosmogony. Cosmogony is the study of the nature, how things exist. Let's compare that with another ancient elder, and that is Elder James. Elder James, in chapter 4, verse 1 to 3, says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight, and you engage in wars. Like now, we are looking at the Ukraine-Russia war going on in my era now. You do not have because you do not ask God. Wait a minute. God seems to be appearing in multiple times. Whenever we talk about the ancient literature, God, image of God seems to be the key theme of all ancient scholars. Verse 3 says, even when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. What does this mean? Elder James argues and he says that the fights and the quarrels come from the desires that battle within every possibility of existence. Therefore, according to James, free will desire is the fundamental basis or the foundationalism of existential causation. As opposed to the Greek scholars, they considered the basis of causing everything that we can see is air, water, fire, and earth, which are the four fundamental elements. Elder James says, no, it's nothing physical that is the basis of existential causation. It is our free will desire. Therefore, Soren Kierkegaard, he noted, basing on his life full of problems, from the way he was born, to the way he lived, to the way he was denied and marginalized at the university, from his mother's death, his father's death, from his own sickness unto death. He said, every individual is free, but is responsible for the outcomes of own free will choices. He said, every individual is free and responsible for outcomes of own free will choices. He basically noted that whatever we are experiencing in life now, we have caused it, or someone has caused it. It is not by coincidence. It is an existential system that whatever we are experiencing has been caused. Therefore, if we want to experience something different, we must cause it also. The existential forms of inquiry, or the sensory response for free will desire so that we can learn to cause, is not uniform with the physical senses by which we see the physical reality. Let me repeat this. The senses that make us cause whatever we cause is not the same senses that enable us to see what we have caused. Studying about the senses for existential causation will be part of the second recording in a series. If we compare James and King Solomon now with Genesis, the first verse of the Bible, it says, and I quote, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." What does this mean? It looks a simple statement, but let me break it down a little. The record of God's causation is based on free will. What do I mean? Free will. James talked of free will. Again, Genesis talks of free will. What does it mean? Is that whatever was created by God is based on his free will desire to cause things. And therefore, so God created or caused man in his own image. Now, we are finding again the image. What does it mean, the image? The image is not a physical image, but with the ability to cause, to process outcomes, which is instilled in males and females. So when God was saying, let there be, let there be, let there be, he was basically causing possibility of existence according to his free will desire. Let me say this. Look at your life. You look at your life. Look at the chaos and the mess in your life. Are these chaoses coincidental? Look at the experiences you are going through. Didn't you make a choice to be part of this? It is by this that if I can put the first verse of the Bible, I can say In the beginning, which is time, God, who is the fundamental nature of existence, created or caused the heaven, the space, and the earth, the matter. Therefore, if I can rephrase the first verse of the Bible, it says, with time, the nature of existence caused space and matter. This is what Albert Einstein formulated as the principle of energy E equals mc squared. Logically, all possibility of whatever we see is never by coincidence. It has been caused. Therefore, it has gone through respective existential processes. Now that something exists rather than nothing, the creation or the now outcomes naturally demands the nature of the causer or the creator, in whose image or likeness of how the causing, the process, the outcome has led to the prevailing experience of existence. Looking at this, we can all agree that our houses where we stay, we were part of the decision to acquire them. The spouses we have, we are part of the free will choice to choose them. The vehicle we have, the problems we are going through, the happiness we are going through, it is not just a physical possibility. We are part of the causation because we are in the image and the likeness of the nature of existence. This is what Genesis 1 implies. Summarizing the findings, Galatians 6:7 gives us another view of Peter's spiritual discernment, which is called as perspicacity. Perspicacity is the ability to see things from the beginning to the end. Paul writes and says, "Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked, for a man reaps what he sows." Paul basically said, do not be ignorant. The nature of existence is not lied to. A man only gets existential outcomes of what he causes by his own free will. Therefore, let us agree, the nature of existence, which is God, is an ecosystem based on the existential system. Let me put it right easily, that the nature and the character of God is to cause, to process, and get outcomes. It is in the same likeness or the image of God that you and me have ability to cause, to process, and get outcomes, but our education system has locked us to only the quest and the study of physical outcomes, which is verifiable and justifiable by physical senses. I want to say, the physical existential problems, including climate change, global warming, corruption, no matter whatever we can talk about, that man is focused to mitigate and resolve, is actually own continuous and conscious causation by free will. Let me put it easily. The problems we are focused to solve is our own continuous causing. We are continuously causing ecosystemic stress. We are continuously causing and processing more physical and non-physical mess, because the nature of our free will desire is malevolent and virulent. None of our existential problems is by random occurrence. None is coincidental. Now, I have alluded and explained that whenever we talk of the image of God, it is how we create, we process, and we get experiences which are physical and non-physical or metaphysical. Let me repeat this. The ancient Eden concept of God was that God is not an entity waiting for the righteous ones after the fullness of their life to go to heaven. But God is all the way in causing, in processing, in creating outcomes by all existential system users or the species throughout their crucibles and their tests. Therefore, the tests, trials, is to enable all species to grow in the likeness of the image of God. The global challenges, including the global warming, the corruption, the change of climate, the diseases, the Ebola, now we have the Ebola going on in Uganda, the COVID which we've just overcome a few months ago, and other diseases are coming because our free will of desire is still causing the more. Do not be deceived. We are the cause of our mess, which we are now thinking we are coming up with the monetary, mathematical, political means to solve. We are basically solving what we are continuously causing. But the nature of God is eternal. It means the existential system is eternal. And all the existential system components are within every individual. Each one of us, me and you, are continuously actually causing. We are processing, and we are enjoying the physical outcome and the non-physical outcomes. But our education system is based on quest for physical truth, as if it is the only possibility of existence. The nature of my existence is part of the nature of existence, where the nature of existence is God Himself. So whenever we pray in our respective religions and beliefs, "Oh God in heaven, I want you to change that," and say, "Oh my God, who is in me?" Because you are in the image of God. Friends, now that we've seen the findings, let me say, looking at the ancient people, the Kemetic education system was founded on the philosophy of Ubuntu. And this is the theory of existentialism that also Kierkegaard alluded to in trying to explain the same concept, that our free will desire is the one causing what we are seeing. So every individual is free, has free will desire, but is responsible for the outcomes. You and me, we are responsible for the experience of existence, for the wars going on, for the diseases going on, for the moral degeneration, for the hooliganism, for the seeming near end of the world. It is my intuition that basing on the nature of existence, the world has no end because it is the nature of existence is God. But you and me, we are the one who have an end because we are only mortal. If only we can study our immortal nature, the nature of existence is in us. We can study that which is not sensible to physical senses. We can together study that which doesn't make sense to arts and sciences. Continuing arguing scientifically on what is not verifiable by physical senses is an existential insanity of man. Let me say, basing on all the compendium of what I've said, I came up with an existential system model. This will guide you in coming up with other knowledge of the future generations. The nature of our existence is an ecosystem, truly. Therefore, since it is an ecosystem, it is an existential system. And whenever I talk about the existential system model, I am basically saying these are the nature of God. Come with me, please. I don't want to lose you. Whenever we talk about God, God is not a physical possibility, but is the possibility of every individual to cause, to process, and gain physical and metaphysical outcomes. It is a great absurdity that our quest for knowledge has continued limited to only existential physical outcome. What am I alluding to? Open your eyes. Come back to Eden. Come back to Al-Keblan. Return to Africa. We are going into another era after Nebuchadnezzar's dream. The transition has already started and it is already underway. That transition is this. We are returning back to the Kemetic education system and restore the Kemetic education system at source. Let me say, the black education system is not for the black-skinned people. It is because of the white supremacy and racism sentimentality that the Greeks considered blacks as inferior, and therefore, as part of conquering ancient Egyptians who were predominantly black people, they called their education system as Kemetic education system. So I want to urge, as I talk about the black education system or the Kemetic education system, this is the fundamental intent. When you put together all the primary colors, the final color will be black. Black does not mean ignorance. Black does not mean inferiority. Black does not mean stupidity. Black actually means completeness of one's image with God. Let me repeat this. Black shines brighter than any other color. It may not make sense to physical senses, and don't argue this. It will be studied in generations to come. Looking at this, basing on the existential system framework, I want to say the considered existential problems now that we are focused to resolve is on continuous unconscious existential causation and processing. But the now quest for knowledge is still limited to what makes sense to physical senses. Friends, if you keep continuing referring to the Socrates and the Greek philosophers, you will never go beyond what makes sense to physical senses, because that's what they were only capable of seeing. But I want you to walk with me and appreciate in the remaining minutes that Nebuchadnezzar's dream is only the physical possibility, the generations of almost 3,000 years, where the quest for knowledge has been constrained to quest for physical truth as if it is the only existential truth. Looking at that, basing on the existential model, I can say reality is never limited to physical reality. Let me say, the reality of my existence in the image of God is never limited to what makes sense to physical senses. Therefore, the possibility of existential knowledge is never limited to what is verifiable and justifiable by physical senses. All the existential system components of the nature of existence are functional, whether we are conscious about it or not. The existential forms of inquiry, or the sensory possibility through which we can gain knowledge of the respective existential system component, is never uniform. It is not competing, but is complementary. It is basing on this that the possibility of reality, knowledge, our identity, what we consider as normal, the truth, the good, what God is, the rights, the essence, and the experience of existence, as long as we continue the quest for such basing on what makes sense by physical senses, it is best and will always be limited to the existential system component for physical outcome. As long as we continue reasoning basing on what makes senses by physical senses, we are only in quest for knowledge of physical truth, but never existential truth. Whenever we talk of the existential outcomes, we are basically talking about physical outcomes, which make sense to physical senses, but as well the metaphysical outcome, which we yet don't know. Therefore, basing on the nature of our existence and the nature of existence of God, the quest for truth is logically never limited to physical truth, which the Greeks considered as phronesis, but the existential truth based on all existential system components. Therefore, neither the knowledge of arts nor sciences is more essential and significant than the others. Let me say, never compare arts and sciences, which one is better or preferred. Both is knowledge of physical outcome. They are not uniform, is not competing, but is complementary. The knowledge of physical outcome, both physical and metaphysical, is not and never able to solve the existential problems which are already caused. The diseases which we are trying to solve have already been caused. This literally implies we are solving symptoms of our own ongoing causing. Therefore, remunerating scientists as more important to those who are studying arts is like comparing rewarding arms as better than legs. They are different components. They are not competing. They are simply complementary. I want to ask, continue in studying the science of arts and the art of science as complementary. It is a wonder that until now, we are basing on mathematical, political, economic, sustainable development models, but to establish mitigation measures for the rational outcomes of our own free will causation and processing. We are basically looking at mathematical models to the outcomes of our free will, which is continuously tending to malevolence and virulent. As the discussion of the results, let me say, the nature of desire, the nature of free will is the foundation of the nature of being. That's why I say, Tomala gayoya yoya. Remember that word. Put it in all your languages. Tomala gayoya yoya. Let me repeat it. Tomala gayoya yoya. Don't simply engage into free will. Each possibility of free will has consequences which are physical and non-physical outcomes. Therefore, I want to urge you that as we continue to study together, open up your brains as we conclude. Knowledge is thus limited to the empirical knowledge of arts and sciences in this generation and era, because the form of inquiry is limited to the somatosensory response to stimulus. Somatosense means physical sense. We can only understand more knowledge if we establish other senses of other existential system components, and that will be part of the second recording in this series. I want to say, the only way to know anything begins by the desire to know. We are now consultants, philosophers, PhD holders, presidents of organizations, academies of sciences, and we are majoring in arts and sciences. Do we want to let go of that which we know, of that which feeds us? I am simply saying it is not the only possibility of existence. It is not the only perspective of existence. Basing on the nature of existence, my own existence is in the image of the nature of existence, which is God. But that which is God is an existential system based on the existential system components for existential causation, existential process, so as to cause physical outcomes and metaphysical outcomes. It is in the outcomes, both physical and non-physical, that we get our experiences of existence. As simple as that. It is up to you to go beyond what makes sense to physical senses, or it is your choice to remain blinded by the Greek philosophers that messed up, abandoned, and banished the Greek ancient education system. The empirical knowledge is never the only perspective of knowledge. As well, the existential problems is not based on only physical outcome, but all existential system components. There are existential problems of causation, of the process, of physical outcome, of outcomes. But we are only solving existential problems which make sense to physical senses. I'm simply crying loud up to you in your face. Wake up. Come, let us reason together. I'm simply saying the considered existential problems stretches beyond what makes sense to physical senses. I'm simply saying every nature of desire yields into rational, consequential, existential, physical, and non-physical outcome. But the now education system, not only in Uganda but globally, even at all major universities, all the academic researches that we are doing in universities, we are focused at quest for physical truth. But we are oblivious of the metaphysical outcomes. Let me put it statistically, that which is visible as the physical truth and the empirical knowledge, because it is seen by the physical senses, can only yield to physical truth, and therefore the physical truth is only a maximum of 0.25 of existential knowledge and existential truth. Listen, I'm saying that which makes sense to physical senses can only yield to physical truth. But the physical truth is only 0.25 of existential truth and existential knowledge. I cannot continuously fail to emphasize that the problems, including the threats, the challenges, the risks that you and me as an individual person, that all academic organizations, that research organizations, that think tanks, that the United Nations is focused to mitigate and resolve, is actually only the rational, consequential, physical outcome of our own continuous, unconscious free will causing and processing. But we are oblivious of the metaphysical or the non-physical outcomes. Therefore, when we talk of climate change, who is changing the climate? And what are we really solving? Are we solving the cause or the change which we've caused? When we are talking of global warming, is the global warming by coincidence? When we talk of corruption, we've corrupted time, we've corrupted money, we've corrupted the context of education, we've corrupted the context of our identity, we've corrupted the context of worship, We must worship God because God is the nature of existence. But God is not a physical possibility which that can be touched or seen by physical senses, but is the nature of existence, into which framework you and me is my existence. Let me say, as I conclude, please, if you are tired, I'm concluding. Basing on the existential system model, the nature of existence is all in one. This is what our ancient African, Alkeblan, ancient Egyptian-led education system considered as the philosophy of Ubuntu. I urge you to grow in consciousness of the interconnectedness and interdependence among the existential system components of the nature of existence. The considered black education system or the Kemetic education system that was considered as a mystery education system by the Greeks was actually teaching you the consciousness of the interconnectedness and interdependence among the nature of existence. Therefore, the belief in scientism, the belief in sciences, the belief in the scientific quest for knowledge can only give us 0.25 of the physical truth, but never the nature of existence. Approaching the quest for God from what makes sense to physical sense can only give us the physical gods. That's why we worship idols in our churches, in our shrines, in our hearts. And these idols have become film stars. They have become the money we have. They have become the land we've acquired. We have even given our names to properties that we don't own. And we say, this is Chiyinji Martin's land. It is not my land. I am just happy in this generation to be the one seated on it. But many people have sat on it and will sit on it forever. Even the cities we claim as our cities have been forests before. And I promise you, they will turn back to ashes in the future. The quest for knowledge, even in Uganda, is constrained to possibility of existence which is verifiable by the physical senses. Therefore, the considered curriculum and the syllabus, even in Uganda, is still only talking about physics, chemistry, biology, history, geography. Let me give you a hint. Because what has happened before has predominantly been documented by men, so they've termed it as his story or history. History simply means his story. If you ask a woman to write the background, it would be called her story or her story. I ask, create another subject where I look at the nature of existence from the female perspective. It will be different from history. It is for this reason that the considered reality, the knowledge, the identity, what we call as normal, the truth, what we call as good, God, rights, essence, and experience is only the possibility of existence that is verifiable by physical senses, but is never the only possibility of existence. Let me say, this is never the only possibility of existence. Reality is never limited to physical reality, but the nature of existence. The physical reality is a maximum of only 0.25, but this is what the Greeks were able to see. This is what the Romans were able to see, and that is why until my date now, education system is in quest for physical truth. The existential forms of inquiry or the senses for the respective existential system components of the nature of existence is never uniform, is never competing, but is complementary. As well, you who is listening to me, your identity is not only a physical possibility. Basing on the nature of existence, science, scientism, and scientific inquiry is only a possibility of existential physical outcome which is verifiable and justifiable by the physical sense to get the physical truth. But basing on the nature of existence, what is considered as knowledge is still insignificant, is 0.1 of the physical truth. Let me repeat this. What we are proud of now as knowledge, physical knowledge, is still 0.1 of what yet is to come, because all existential system components are function. When you study conscious causation, you will learn and you'll experience new subjects of physicality, but basing on conscious causation. Let me say, the empirical knowledge is the perspective of knowledge caused by the Greek education system when they deleted, when they demolished and banished the Kemetic education curriculum. None of the ancient Greek scholars is noted to have considered the 40 years of the ancient Kemetic education system. We can proudly say, whenever the quest for knowledge was beyond what makes sense to physical senses, the Greeks jumped out of classes, so they were school dropouts. The intent of the Greeks was to acquire material wealth. It is by this basis that materialism has continued as the basis of being healthy and wealthy. We are working hard to acquire land and vehicles and whatever and beautiful houses. But how much do we use such resources? It is too insignificant. Therefore, despite the hopes and promise of artificial intelligence as our basis of technology, it is a possibility of intelligence based on physical outcomes. It is artificial indeed. It is never the only possibility of intelligence. Other existential system components have intelligence far different from artificial intelligence. Despite our robotics, despite our maximum ability to think and compute basing on physical senses, it is still a possibility of physical outcomes. Basing on the nature of nature as one of the sub-perspectives of the nature of desire, man is seeking for a new world order, but is oblivious of the order of existence. Let me repeat. We are busy looking for a new world order, but we are oblivious of the order of existence, which is based on the nature of existence. It is in the order of existence that my and your survival is limited to prior wellness and well-being of other species. Let me put it this. My and your survival is limited to the wellness, metaphysical, and well-being, the physical, of other resources and species, including including the trees, including the birds, including the animals, including whatever that lives underwater and above us. This simply means that man, we are the dependent species within the existential ecosystem of all species. We are the dependent species. Now, as part of my conclusion, I'll end with a recommendation. We have only studied the physical outcomes of the 4 existential system components. I urge you transition into existential causation, which is conscious of whatever we are causing into physical outcome. The nature of our free will desire will impact the nature of our outcomes. Leave the 2 components, the existential process and the metaphysical outcome. This will be for the very far future generations. And as you transition, basing on the nature of existence, which is God, all existential system users, so all species, they are continuously engaged in computing. They are causing and they are processing existential physical and non-physical outcome from which to gain the experience of existence. But our education system is focused at only physical truth rather than existential truth. Therefore, the problem of study is the existential knowledge is held hostage by empirical knowledge, and we think we are so much advanced. The existential form of inquiry for all the 4 existential system component is never uniform, is not competing, but is complementary. That's why I'm urging you, grow into knowledge of own identity based on all existential system components of the nature of existence. I would give you an insight. What you see now is a taxonomical classification of existential system based on verifiability and justifiability of possibility of existence. This is a reconstruction of the abolished and banished black education system, which was based on quest to grow in the image of God. Right now we're on the same page. that whenever I talk about the image of God, I'm talking about the nature of existence. The nature of existence is based on the existential system component for input, process, and outcomes. So our consciousness is metaphysical for causation, metaphysical for process, it is physical for physical outcome, and metaphysical for non-physical outcome. What does this imply? That the significant part of our identity is 3/4 metaphysical, not physical. Let me repeat. Your identity, you, and my identity as Martin, we are 3/4 non-physical and only 1/4 a physical possibility. There are different natures of reality. The nature of desire is the foundation of existential causation. The nature of transfiguration is, we will study it as the nature of the process system component. We've studied the nature of being, which is the nature of what we can see, touch, sense by physical senses. But the nature of the worth of existence is the nature of metaphysical outcomes. Basing on the perspectives of knowledge, I ask, the future is not founded in artificial intelligence, no matter the opulence, no matter the good, no matter the wonder we see in technology. But I want us to transition. We've only studied the nature of being, which is 1/4 to the nature of my existence and your existence as an individual. We've studied the nature of expression as arts and the nature of creations or outcomes as sciences. I want us to transition and study the nature of free will. We need to study the nature of nature itself, into which we are a very tiny aspect of the nature of nature. I want us to study the nature of the existential system users. We need to study the nature of nothingness. We will study other natures, but this is fundamental. The taxonomical classification of existential system is actually the tree of life talked about in Genesis. It is the tree of life for knowing the good and the evil, and it is the basis of passing on the knowledge tree. The tree of life talked about in Genesis. Many scholars have written about it, but it is not a physical tree. We will study this in detail. We have looked at all the problems: climate change, clean water, population, democratizations, governance, education, peace, conflict, status of women, and all whatever it is. Do you know that all these problems, they are actually linked? None is a problem of its own. So you cannot solve this problem singularly, that you want to solve and have clean water when the population is exploding. No. Come with me to appreciate that we are only focused to mitigate and resolve the already caused existential physical outcome. To solve these problems, we must go beyond what makes sense to physical senses. And I urge you and anybody who's in authority, at what level, come back to Africa, come back to Al-Keblan, and we think again. and we'll reason again. The fundamental problem is not what we have caused already and what we have processed. That is what we have done. If we need it to change, we must go back and study the nature of our free will desire, because it's tending into malevolence and virulence. Therefore, it is creating experiences of existence indicative of our free will desire. We have left you the evidence and guidance of who you are. This has been inscribed on the stones. It has been inscribed in the dust. It has been inscribed in the wind. You are in the image of God. You are not only a physical possibility, but 3/4 of your identity, you are a metaphysical possibility. I urge you, go back and read the stones. Compare with the dust. Compare with the winds. These words now, they don't make sense. But to a few of us, we understand it. Man is the existential problem actually, because is merely the existential container of own humanity. Humanity, which is the foundation of humaneness, is only 3/4. Now, you may wonder, but come to understand, 3/4 of your identity is embedded in 1/4 of your physical reality. I repeat this, 3/4 of your identity as a metaphysical possibility is embedded in 1/4 of your physical possibility. We have written this on the stones. Go back, read the stones, read the dust, and read the winds. The nature of existence is surely the foundationalism of existential knowledge and empirical knowledge. But empirical knowledge is only the physically verifiable and justifiable existential knowledge. Grow into the knowledge of conscious existential causation. Then gradually transition into knowledge of other existential system components of the nature of existence. It is in the nature of existence that my existence and your existence is founded. Neither the past nor the future is coincidental, but is the nature of existence, based on the existential system components. The nature of desire is indicative, is the foundation of the experience of existence. Whatever we experience now has actually been caused. If you want to change it, go back to your free will desire. Let me say this. It is not that the existing global problems cannot be solved, but they are the means of economic gains. Do we want HIV to stop? Do we want these problems to stop? What will the UN do if all the problems are over? Do we want our problems, which are the basis of economic development, stop? Think differently and think upside down. This is not based on reasoning of physical reality. I urge you, man, know thyself. You are a dependent species, and you are the host of the 3/4 of your own humanity. It remains a mystery in this series for now, that 3/4 of your identity is held in a quarter of you. Therefore, the 3/4 of your identity is inside a quarter of you. My existence is into the image of God, which is the existential system components of the nature of existence. I cannot forget to thank my great supervisors, Dr. Chiyinji Frank Pio. Thank you. Dr. Namugumya Esther. Thank you. I am from Nkumba University. I want to ask, no matter wherever you are in the corner of this world, come, let us reason together. Come, let us find meaning to new possibilities of existence. Empirical knowledge is never the only possibility of existence. And as I conclude finally, the nature of existence is the foundationalism of existential knowledge, into which empirical knowledge is only the component that makes sense to physical sense. I thank you, and I thank you, and I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much.